Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I'm John Alger, president of James Madison University, and I'd like to welcome you to this year's first installment of the Madison Vision Series. The goal of this series is to bring prominent leaders to campus to look at our current civic landscape through the prism of creating an engaged and enlightened citizenry. Later this semester, we will hear from Jeff Rosen, Chief Executive Officer and President of the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. We will also have a unique presentation in November from a national debate team from Rwanda who will share the story of recovery in Rwanda through the eyes of a post-genocide generation. In the spring, we look forward to bringing you Marianne Mason, co-director of the Center for Economics and Family Security at the University of California, Berkeley, and Harvard's Lawrence Lessig, an internationally renowned expert on issues related to cyberspace and ethics. We want to thank all the supporters of the Madison Vision Fund and the series co-sponsor, the Office of Madison Institutes in Outreach and Engagement, who have made this series possible. And now, let me turn to the main event today, Constitution Day 2014. What a great joy and privilege it is to be joined by a very distinguished native son of Harrisonburg, the Honorable William C. Mims. In 2011, Justice Mims was appointed to the Virginia Supreme Court after having served as both Attorney General of Virginia and Chief Deputy Attorney General, as well as having served in the Virginia Senate and House of Delegates. Justice Mims is Virginia's 100th justice and only the second to previously serve as a lawmaker and Attorney General, making him that rare individual who has served in all three branches of state government at the most senior levels. While his public service career has certainly been impressive, we are equally excited about his ties to Harrisonburg and JMU. We are joined today not just by Justice Mims, but also by his sister, former JMU faculty member Diane Mims Langhorst. And Diane, where are you? I saw you earlier. There she is. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome back. Glad to have you. It's a bit of a family reunion today, as you'll see. The Mims family history in Harrisonburg actually began in 1954 when Bill and Diane's father, Lathan Mims, came to Harrisonburg to serve as the editor of the Daily News Record, a role he held until 1980. In the intervening years, he raised a family not far from where we sit today off of Mason Street. In fact, the current justice was known to play on campus with his three siblings at Hillcrest, the president's home at the time. If you want to play over at Oakview later, we can do that too, Bill. While attending Harrisonburg High School in the early 1970s, in the site that of course is now known as Memorial Hall and that is home to the JMU College of Education, Justice Mims played football, where he was named an all-district offensive tackle, wrestled, ran track, edited the school newspaper, maybe a little bit of the family business in the blood there, and was an honors student. After his formative years in Harrisonburg, the justice went on to receive a degree in history from the College of William and Mary, where he also did graduate work in public administration. He has law degrees from George Washington University and Georgetown University. As a sign of how our early years shape us, this track athlete still enjoys running, and in fact crossed the finish line at the Boston Marathon just minutes before explosions rocked the finish line just 17 months ago. I love the title of today's lecture, Be It Ever So Humble, Justice as a Virtue. It reminds us of a quote from Madison at the Virginia Ratifying Convention in 1788 that is in your program. Is there no virtue among us? If there be not, we are in a wretched situation. Indeed, Justice Mims himself expressed the importance of humility in an interview from around the time of his appointment to the Virginia Supreme Court when he said, "I hope I will be regarded in Virginia history as one for whom public service was an honor and a privilege, and one who added value to the legislative, executive, and judiciary functions. The task of a justice is not to make a name for himself or herself. Consequently, I would not expect my name to be featured prominently in history. That's not the task to which I've been appointed. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the Forbes Center stage Justice William Mims.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thanks a lot. After that introduction, I have to catch my breath. John, thank you. Thank you very much. It is a true honor and a pleasure to be here. I will say that here I am not Justice Mims. I am not Mr. Mims. For the most part, I am not Bill Mims to those who are here. There's a whole bunch of folks here who know me as Billy Mims. And that puts the name in historical context. If we can go ahead and hit a slide. There we go. Thomas Wolfe wrote that you can't go home again. In many ways, that's true. The sleepy Harrisonburg, where I grew up, population 14,000, is no longer. Likewise, Madison College, whose quaint Bluestone campus was the site of my elementary school, just about 2 doors over, is but a memory. My home on Mason Street was merely old. It was not yet part of Old Town. But I take issue with Mr. Wolfe, as indicated by the title of this talk, which I've taken from a 19th century song. Mid pleasures and palaces, though we may roam, may it be ever so humble, there's no place like home. Indeed, there is no place like Harrisonburg, and no university quite like James Madison. What is not humble is the success that JMU has experienced over the past 50 years during the presidencies of Tyler Miller, Ron Carrier, Lynn Rose, and now John Alger. And I'm old enough that I have known them all. My family's connections with JMU likewise aren't humble, as indicated by my sister's introduction. There's a journalism scholarship named in honor of my late father, Lathan Mims, and my other sister, Sandy Rowe, was once on the Board of Visitors. My history at JMU, though, is more checkered. The campus was my playground as a child. I committed transgressions here as a teen, one of which, and only one of which, resulted in a visit to juvenile court. So this talk is actually an opportunity for redemption. I'm also humbled as I note that your speaker for Constitution last year was A.E. Dick Howard, a renowned constitutional scholar. I'm hardly worthy to carry his briefcase, but I appreciate being able to carry this particular day at this podium. Enough about me. Got it. Let's talk about virtue. What is virtue? The simple definition is behavior showing high moral standards. Its synonyms include goodness, righteousness, integrity, dignity, and honor. If I were to ask, was Mother Teresa a paragon of virtue, surely the answer is a resounding yes. What about John Alger? Well, he's no Mother Teresa. But again, the answer clearly is yes. Now, if I asked whether Mother Teresa and John Alger are just, you might puzzle over the meaning of that term before saying yes. We don't usually think of a variant of justice as a virtue. I recently asked a group of friends, what does it mean when I say someone is just? And their responses were fair, good, respected, honest, kind, compassionate. Those responses pretty much hit the mark. They showed an innate understanding that even though we don't typically call people just, we understand that justice can be a virtue. That's what this talk is about. It's justice as an individual ideal. It's divided into three parts. First, I'll examine justice as we commonly perceive it, which is as a governmental or societal goal. Then I'm going to touch briefly upon two historical precedents for considering justice as a virtue. And finally, I'll ask, what are some characteristics of individuals who aspire to the virtue of justice? Ultimately, I intend to challenge you, and I intend to challenge myself to do justice. I also want to quickly make two disclaimers. I am not an accomplished speaker. I'm nervous. I grip the podium. I'm going to talk entirely too much from my written text. I wrote it myself, though. There's no one who writes it for me. And my PowerPoint is so 1990s. But what I lack in polish, I hope to make up for in sincerity. I'm also not an academic, and this is not an academic lecture. I'm neither a scholar nor a philosopher, and so terms such as metaethical, normative, empiricism, and rationalism will not cross my lips today, primarily because I don't understand them. Rather, I'm a lawyer from Harrisonburg who's been blessed with a career in public service. Now, let's get started. Jerry Reed in the movie Smokey and the Bandit said, "We've got a long way to go and a short time to get there." The sheriff in that movie, Buford T. Justice, is not the individual justice that we'll be referring to. That's the justice that we'll refer to. What is justice? You know, I've spent more than a generation in the justice business. I spent 14 years serving on the Courts of Justice committees in the General Assembly, crafting the laws relating to justice. Then 4 years at Virginia's Department of Justice, the Office of the Attorney General. And now for 4 years, justice has been a title that I wear along with the robe that's a mantle of judicial authority. The first duty of a judge is to be just. That's also the first duty of every citizen. But only recently have I asked the fundamental question, what is justice? The dictionary definition is less than satisfying. It just really doesn't do it for me. So let's get past the dictionary and talk. I feel like Joan Rivers. Can we talk? Justice is a civic mantra that children begin to learn as early as kindergarten. When they pledge allegiance to the flag, they close with justice for all. Our leaders promise it, and some even strive for it. Who can forget Martin Luther King's soaring eloquence as he paraphrased this verse from the prophet Amos? "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." Variants are injected into our political debates. We speak of a just war, a just society, or a just wage to justify our policy views. Lawyers and judges even know that justice can trump the letter of the law. Courts sometimes apply what is known as the ends of justice exception, which is a doctrine of mercy when the strict application of the law would lead to an unduly harsh result. So everyone is talking about justice, but what does it mean? United States Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart expressed it succinctly. Fairness is what justice really is. That's actually a good start. Justice is primarily about fairness, particularly when you talk about court procedures. But is fairness all that justice is? Though that formulation is pithy and easy to grasp, justice as fairness can descend into the quicksand of moral relativism. It is easy to conclude that a policy is fair and thereby just merely because I agree with the end result. So we have to dig deeper than mere fairness in order to answer the question. In our society, justice often refers to courts, and particularly the criminal justice system in which guilt is determined, punishment is meted out, and restitution and rehabilitation, hopefully, are achieved. Likewise, justice can refer to the civil litigation process, in which non-criminal disputes, such as breaches of contracts or fault for personal injuries, are adjudicated. Justice also refers to the procedures in those courts that ensure fair treatment, including trial by jury, confrontation of witnesses, and the right to counsel. Outside the judicial sphere, justice can refer to social justice that refers to ameliorating societal ills such as poverty, domestic violence, and substandard education. I would classify all of these, criminal justice, civil justice, procedural justice, and social justice, as societal or systematic justice. They describe desired goals or systems within the state. But let's go deeper than that. What about the virtue of individual justice? The ideal characteristics possessed by a just man or a just woman? Because surely the cultivation of just citizens would help us to achieve a just society. Some of the earliest exhortations to strive for individual justice are found in Hebrew scripture and Athenian philosophy. Let's begin with the Hebrew Bible. There's two terms that we translate into the English word justice, mishpat and zedek, that appear there hundreds of times. Dr. King's quote was a paraphrase from the prophet Amos. If he had read from the Hebrew text, he would have said, "Let mishpat roll down like waters." The oft-quoted verse from the prophet Micah, "To do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly," translates, "And what does God require of you but to do mishpat?" Zedek appears in the promise given by God to the Hebrew people in the Torah that is read annually in synagogues. "Justice, justice, zedek, zedek, shall you pursue, that you may live and inherit the land which the Lord your God gives you." Mishpat is individual justice. It's the virtue that impels a person to do something. Zedek primarily relates to an end result, social justice for the poor and dispossessed. Rabbi Melanie Aaron expresses it this way: Mishpat is often identified with even-handed justice, with fairness, with treating everyone the same. This is justice as equal justice under law. Zedek is different. We create zedek by creating a system, remember I said systematic justice, for the fairer distribution of goods, services, and opportunities. So mishpat is individual justice, zedek is the result, the societal justice. What's the difference between the two in the context of modern America? The struggle for civil rights that Martin Luther King led was to do mishpat. He exhorted America's leaders individually, be true to what you said on paper in the Constitution about civil rights. The Poor People's Campaign that took him to Memphis on that fateful April night in 1968 was an example of zedek, a struggle for economic justice. So there is the first example of individual justice, mishpat. Now, let's travel a few hundred miles and a few hundred years to Athens. The writings of Plato, particularly the Socratic dialogue in the Republic, give us another indication of individual justice. The Republic is Plato's compilation of dialogues between Socrates and his students. And I can assure you that the last time I ever looked at the Republic, I was in a classroom much like you find here at James Madison, until I became a justice and wanted to know, what is it that we're talking about here? It's primarily a discussion of the meaning of justice, the characteristics of a just man, and the relationship of the just man to the polis, the city-state. And by the way, I want to immediately say that we're dealing with 2,500 years ago, And today, we're talking about the just women and just men, despite what the Greeks may have said 2,500 years ago. Interestingly as well, Socrates and his students had just as much trouble defining justice as Webster's does now. They did identify justice as one of 4 virtues possessed by individuals, along with wisdom, bravery, and temperance. Justice was the highest aspiration. Plato notes that the one who commits injustice is more to be pitied than the one who suffers injustice. Plato viewed the just individual as guided by a vision of that which is good. That vision caused reason to govern passion and ambition. Plato understood that the internal compass of the individual was essential to his external direction. Individuals must be just and do justice in order for the city-state to flourish. Now, one key concept expressed in the Republic is that the polis, the city-state, ought to be ruled by philosopher kings, just individuals who are motivated by the collective good rather than personal gain. Though we no longer speak of philosopher kings, that ideal resonates across the centuries to the American Republic, and particularly it resonates on Constitution Day. There's not enough time to continue to delve into Plato's thought, but what is important to remember is that justice in his writings is the highest aspiration of the individual. And only if the individual is just will the society be just. It is the noble virtue that is primarily concerned with others instead of self. Now, this conversation with Socrates and Plato and others in Greece then was continued. It carried over into Rome and was carried on by Cicero and Justinian, among others. And I'll tell you that from my perspective, even though I'm nervous, this has been kind of fun, because I've just covered about 2,000 years of history in about 10 or 15 minutes. And as a history major, I wish it could be done that way. But we're going a little slow, so I'm now going to cover 1,600 years in less than 60 seconds. The Judeo-Christian spiritual stream and the Greco-Roman philosophical stream that we've talked about began to flow together as one river during the waning years of the Roman Empire with St. Ambrose and St. Augustine. Then after a long dry spell, they flowed freely again through the writings of Thomas Aquinas, and each of these great thinkers, going all the way back to the Hebrew prophets, grappled with the concept of individual justice, as did Enlightenment philosophers such as David Hume, who also tested these waters. So, 1,600 years later, we have come to the shores of the New World. There won't be a test on that last part, by the way. Specifically, the rebellious American colonies in the 1770s. Talk of independence and liberty is on every lip. Now, America's founders were schooled in Greek and Latin, and you may not have known this, but James Madison even studied Hebrew. They were knowledgeable about Aquinas, and they were quite familiar with the Enlightenment philosophers. So what did America's founders, and particularly those who crafted the Constitution, have to say about individual justice, about justice as a virtue? Not as much as you might expect. At first, this might seem surprising, but the founders were not primarily concerned with enshrining the virtue of individual justice. Rather, they had other concerns that were more pressing. The Constitution is how the people of the states delegated sovereignty to a federal republic. It was something that had never been done before successfully on such a grand scale. So the virtue of individual justice was not their highest priority at the time. They were more about telling the federal government what it could and could not do, rather than telling individuals what they should or should not do. Even the addition of the Bill of Rights lacks a moral imperative for individuals. The Bill of Rights is a guarantee that the power of government is not wielded unjustly against the people, but it doesn't speak to the highest aspirations of the people themselves as citizens. James Madison, in supporting the Bill of Rights, said he wished to fortify the rights of the people against the encroachments of government. In many ways, though, James Madison, the father of the Constitution and a proponent of individual rights, likewise was an articulate advocate for individual justice. Now, Madison was no mountaintop sage planning for the perfectibility of man. Those of you who went to the University of Virginia, I apologize for that last sentence. But you're not going to like this next one much better. While Thomas Jefferson was pursuing happiness in Paris, Madison, ever the sober realist, was wrestling in the Federalist Papers with man's depravity. I quote, "As there is a degree of depravity in mankind which requires a certain degree of circumspection and distrust, so there are other qualities in human nature which justify esteem and confidence. Republican government presupposes the existence of these qualities." Madison wryly noted that we are not angels, a charge that could apply equally to him after his backroom scheming against President Washington while serving in Washington's cabinet. And he certainly didn't believe that individual citizens became more angelic when they gathered together as legislatures. I quote Madison again, "Passion never fails to wrest the scepter from reason. Had every Athenian citizen been a Socrates, every Athenian assembly would still have been a mob." But Madison did believe that virtuous, that is, just individuals could be found to rule. He said, "The aim of every political constitution is to obtain for rulers men who possess the most wisdom to discern and the most virtue to pursue the common good of the society." Distressingly, as we proceed through American history, we may listen for expressions of individual justice from our leaders, but there are few. We rarely hear our leaders speak of virtues generally or individual justice in particular. And few seem to recognize a causal link between individual justice, virtuous leaders, and a just society. James Madison, Abraham Lincoln, and Martin Luther King certainly did, but one prophet per century does not a movement make. Part of the problem could be a lack of a simple definition of individual justice to carry the message. I've already put a definition on the board that is unsatisfying. The first book of the Republic is almost entirely devoted to what is justice in terms of defining it, and Socrates and his students were unable to. Now, I'll tell you, if Socrates can't do it, then Billy Mims from Mason Street isn't going to try. Let me take a more humble approach. What characteristics are usually present in just men and women? I believe there are at least three. The three that I'm referring to are humility, empathy, and mercy. If one is humble, empathetic, and merciful, their resulting actions are likely to be fair. And as noted, justice is fairness. So let's examine these characteristics. They don't stand alone, they are interrelated. Humility was not favored in antiquity, in Greece and Rome. Professor Alistair MacIntyre notes that Aristotle's great-souled man is extremely proud. He despises honors offered by the common people. He indulges in conspicuous consumption, for he likes to own beautiful and useless things, since they are better marks of his independence. Conspicuous consumption. beautiful and useful things. Beautiful and useless things. Let me make sure I get that straight. Does that remind you of any modern culture? Oxford's Robin Lane Fox observes, among pagan authors, humility had almost never been a term of commendation. The notion of humility, of servanthood as a virtue, took root from the Jewish thinkers and prophets, as well as the early Christian church. But one would expect theologians to speak of humility. More noteworthy is how this virtue has been embraced today in the business world, and particularly as a characteristic of what is known as servant leadership. Jim Collins is the best-selling author of Good to Great and Built to Last, and he describes humility as the essential quality for the most successful leaders, the leaders who sacrifice their own egos for the benefit of the many. James Madison University alumnus G.J. Hart, who also went to high school in Harrisonburg and spoke on the James Madison campus recently, is the CEO of California Pizza Kitchen, one of the most successful business leaders in America. He describes how he knows whether a management prospect will have leadership potential. He says, "I can usually tell if they have the humility to make it." Now, politicians have been a little slower to jump on the humility bandwagon, and it's perhaps due to the nature of the electoral process. My former colleague, Clint Miller, who at the time was a delegate from Woodstock, was infused with Shenandoah Valley candor, and he once told me, "My mama taught me not to brag, but my mama never ran for office." So we'll give the politicians a pass on this one. However, my favorite humble person in American history may be a politician, although certainly more of a statesman, none other than James Madison. In addition to the quote that's on the screen, I love what Richard Brookhiser says about him. He was quiet and unprepossessing, even willing to be the straight man for Jefferson's jokes. Madison was a great man and was not afraid of deferring to other great men. He also worked with the less than great, hatchet men and gossips, snoops and spies. They do the work of politics too. They are part of the game. Ah yes, not an angel among them. Even virtuous men have a few warts. Now, many politicians are strangers to humility, but they do speak freely of empathy, the second quality of individual justice. Who remembers, "I feel your pain"? But truly feeling one's pain is risky. It is, in fact, painful. So it may be spoken of more than it is actually practiced. Empathy often derives from faith. It's expressed in the Golden Rule from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." But this maxim is universal. It is repeated, But this maxim is universal. It is repeated in all of the world's major religions. Be one Buddhist, Hindu, a practitioner of Islam, or a Jew. All of those faiths encourage understanding and respect for the rights and feelings of others. Although the Athenians rejected humility, they embraced empathy as a characteristic of individual justice. Plato wrote that to injure a friend or anyone else is not the act of a just man, but of the opposite, who is unjust. So that brings us to mercy. If justice means giving to others what we owe them, then mercy means giving to others more than we owe them. This concept also has deep roots in the soil of faith. Pope John Paul II observed that mercy reveals the perfection of justice. Abraham Lincoln believed deeply that mercy is essential to complete justice. And as I mentioned earlier, this principle of Anglo-American law dates back 700 years, that sometimes mercy will trump the rule of law. The Lord Chancellor's Equity Court began under the rule of Edward III, and it was where the King's Chancellor, the King's Counselor, was able, when necessary and appropriate, to apply equity, to apply mercy, rather than the law when a harsh result would have been the case. But I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to paraphrase the prophet Micah. Is it possible to truly do justice without loving mercy? I used to think of these two virtues as being separate. I put on my suit, I went to the office, I did justice. And then I went home, I changed into other clothes, maybe I waited until the weekend, and I volunteered for a good cause, or I reached out to a friend in need. And therefore, I did mercy. They were silos, the justice and the mercy. But I think that Pope John Paul II got it right. I think there is no dichotomy. I think there is a unity between justice and mercy. Micah, the Hebrew prophet, got it right also. Let's talk about one additional word from Hebrew. In addition to mishpat, justice, which means action, which is what you do, there's also a Hebrew word for mercy. And I'm going to probably not get it quite right. So if there's any Hebrew scholars in the audience who want to just stand up and shout it out, you go right ahead. But that word is chesed. It's the attitude with which one acts. I love the alternative English translation for chesed. It usually is translated as mercy, but it also can be translated as loving kindness. So one should do justice with mercy, and sometimes even with loving kindness. Now, I don't have you up here this time, John. Okay. Are there women and men who exemplify these qualities of individual justice who we all recognize because they are internationally and nationally famous? Ones that have the characteristics of humility, empathy, and mercy. Certainly Mother Teresa comes to mind, along with Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, and Nelson Mandela. But perhaps my favorite example comes from literature. Jean Valjean in Les Miserables. His story begins as he is the victim of cruel punishment without mercy, as prisoner 24601. Then he is spared a return to prison by the gift of Monseigneur Bienvenu, the personification of individual justice whose mercy spills over into exuberant loving kindness. Valjean then devotes his life to doing justice. He has a terrible lapse that indirectly results in Fantine's death. But nevertheless, he does justice to the man who was falsely accused of being prisoner 24601, to Cosette and Marius, and even to Inspector Javert. Javert is the tragic figure who cannot comprehend and ultimately cannot live as the beneficiary of justice with mercy. He is the personification of justice without mercy. Valjean is the personification of justice with mercy. But are there examples who are not among great world leaders, or who are not fictional creations? Are there less prominent leaders and everyday citizens whose lives are devoted to individual justice? Of course, there are many. Here is an interesting leader who you may not have considered. What about Gerald Ford? As president, he was a humble man who was propelled to that office in a unique manner, having never been elected to any office except Congress. His pardon of the despised Richard Nixon probably did cost him election to a full term. His popularity on the day that the pardon was announced dropped by almost 50% within 24 hours. Yet that was an act of mercy, and historians have treated it much more gently than journalists did at the time. As Ford later reflected, the hate had to be drained and the healing begun, even at the cost of his own potential election as president. So a commitment to individual justice can involve great personal sacrifice. It can even involve danger. Pastor Tim Keller, in the book Generous Justice, writes of a young man he once talked. Keller says, "He moved to Sandtown, one of the poorest and most dangerous neighborhoods in Baltimore, to do justice. For the first couple of years, it was touch and go. He said, the police thought I was a drug dealer, and the drug dealers thought I was a police officer. I didn't know who was going to shoot me first." In Richmond, where I now live, Janet Kelly, Virginia's former Secretary of the Commonwealth, her husband Ryan, and their 3 children have just moved to Highland Park. Several young professional couples influenced by the civil rights leader John Perkins have moved to the far north side of Church Hill. What are these particular neighborhoods like? They are rough. One of the vehicles that cruises through is an ominous black Hummer with the license plate Blunts. You may not know what Blunts means. A blunt is a marijuana cigar. These folks left comfortable and safe homes. Why did they do it? To do justice. They are in the vanguard of individual justice, propelled by empathy and mercy for their vulnerable and marginalized neighbors. As these examples demonstrate, there are those whose lives represent individual justice who may be more apparent than first appears to be the case, may be more numerous than first appears to be the case. Why is that? Perhaps because justice is indeed the humble virtue. Those who practice it would rather help others than to promote themselves. But they are our neighbors, our co-workers, and our friends. Now, this talk has been about virtue generally, individual justice specifically, and the characteristics of humility, empathy, mercy, and ultimately fairness. That's well and good, but we are on a university campus, and so I have to ask, how is the virtue of individual justice relevant to academia? And specifically, how is it relevant to James Madison University? Richard Kirk, the author and conservative political theorist, asks that same question incisively, and I quote, "Justice is a certain rectitude of mind, whereby a man does what he ought to do in the circumstances confronting him. So Thomas Aquinas instructs us. At every college and university, the faculty ought to inquire of themselves, do we impart such rectitude of mind? And if we do not, will there be tolerable private or public order in the 21st century?" Rectitude of mind. What is that? When I read that question, I thought, I need to go look for what rectitude of mind is. Well, I found a definition of rectitude of mind in the 1828 edition of Webster's Dictionary. The definition is, it is the disposition to act in conformity to any known standard of right, truth, or justice. It is the disposition to act in conformity to any known standard of right, truth, or justice. The question resounds through the ages, from Thomas Aquinas to the present. are the faculty and administration of JMU committed to imparting rectitude of mind. For a moment, I will figuratively remove my judicial robe, I will step off of the bench, and I will become an advocate to present evidence and answer that question. The evidence is the Madison Collaborative, Ethical Reasoning in Action, JMU's innovative program to prepare students to be educated and enlightened citizens who lead productive and meaningful lives. And the answer is yes. The Madison Collaborative provides a framework for the learning process by asking 8 key questions. And by the way, I understand that everyone who's a student, faculty, or administrator has committed these to heart. So it's the Harrisonburg folks who I'm running through them for quickly. It asks 8 key questions that say, and I quote, that reflect the best of humanity's ethical reasoning traditions. The questions highlight 8 vital human values: fairness, outcomes, responsibilities, character, liberty, empathy, authority, and rights. And because they are so important, here are those 8 questions. Fairness: how can I act equitably and balance legitimate interests? Outcomes: what achieves the best short and long-term outcomes for me and all others? Responsibilities: what duties and/or obligations apply? Character: what action best reflects who I am and the person I want to become? Liberty: how does respect for freedom, personal autonomy, or consent apply? Empathy: what would I do if I care deeply about those involved? Authority: what do legitimate authorities, for example, experts, law, my religion, my God, expect of me? And rights: what rights, for example, innate, legal, or social, apply? This is the framework for education here in the year 2014. Did you notice something about these questions? There is a common thread: the virtue of individual justice. The Madison Collaborative and similar initiatives across the academic landscape give us hope that the virtue of individual justice will flourish in the 21st century. Oh, sorry about that. Didn't realize that we, okay. I apologize for running quickly through those last 3. I should have been turning around each time. In conclusion, Robert Kennedy eloquently gave voice to the virtue. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. Those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls. Women and men of James Madison University, make ripples, do justice. Thank you.